usually the girl has no say. But this isn't really the shocking part. The shocking part is one of the first questions that the groom side asks is if they hold a tobacco license. And it's not like how they look like, their income or anything. So basically, in order to like grow tobacco and build a barn to process it and sell it, you need to have a license. And if you have this license, it shows that you're economically stable, and it's really hard to get a license these days. So anyone that owns this license is really prideful. So in the SHGs in all the villages that we go to, the marriageable age kids, the groom side usually ask, if they have, the first question they ask is if they have a tobacco license. And the bride side of the family, if they possess it, they know that they will eventually get a match for their daughter because it has such a great effect on their society. So one of the main issues that we are thinking of about this, about taking tobacco out of Hunsur Taluk is tobacco has such a great effect on the society, and if they take it all, if it's illegal to grow tobacco eventually, we're wondering what kind of effect it'll have on society. And before this, we had no respect for tobacco cultivation, but now we do because we know of the great effects it has on society.
Incredible, really incredible, I have to admit. So tell me, Adarsha, being the mastermind of this whole plan, how frequently do you visit India? Or should I say more specifically, your main base of operations?
That's a good way to describe it. So since 2006, we've been visiting every year in the summer, and the past year we also went in the winter as well. So that I think that amounts to 5+ visits. And we're probably going back this winter. Apurva and I are probably going back this winter as well, depending if the farmers need us or not. And for certain, we're going to keep going through the summers, even through college as well, because we feel it's an endeavor certainly to keep pursuing.
So, Apurva, you mentioned this, the resistance to change on the rural level, and seeing how poor it is, in rural India is. Just introducing this new Jatropha plan, have you experienced that resistance to change?
Yeah, obviously there's resistance to change because tobacco is the only cash crop in the Hunsur Taluk area. It's basically one of the only crops that gives you income. And the farmers actually have heard of Jatropha. It's not like an unknown concept. They have the wild variety, and they use it as a hedge crop around their plots of lands because it's poisonous to animals, so it keeps animals out of their farm. But they were still really skeptical about our project, even though we promised that we would give them high quality seedlings, and we educated them about the usefulness of the seeds, which they weren't aware about, and of our age and lack of experience. But so what we promised them was that we would provide them with high quality Jatropha seedlings, and they could plant it as part of intercropping. That means they don't have to stop any amount of tobacco that they're growing already. They can just plant it in between, or they can just use it in their dry, arid land that they don't use for any of their normal crops.
So you guys go to these farmers, you give them some seeds, and just say, grow these, no strings attached, and so what have been the reactions that you've seen?
From the farmers or from the plants?
From the farmers.
Okay. So, do you want to take this? Cool. So from the farmers, they're actually relatively enthusiastic about it because once we told them that the Indian government signed the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which states that India has cut down tobacco cultivation and production by 50% in 2020, and they're offering no alternative crop, which is kind of problematic. The farmers were thinking, well, some of them were like, okay, well, they realized the importance of switching or trying to wean themselves off of tobacco right now because, I mean, at least 50% of the livelihood is, going down the toilet. So they thought that, hey, let's see how good this idea is. I mean, we gotta have something in the wings waiting for us. And others were still hesitant, but they really saw no harm for it because first off, we were growing as a hedge crop and they're already using it, so it helps them. Second off, we can grow it intercropping. It helps both the Jatropha and the tobacco, no problem there. Or they can also grow it on land that they're not using. So, I mean, there's really for them, they thought there's no reason not to do so. And they really think that it's a good idea because supplementing their income, since they're so poor, I mean, it's a really good benefit anyways. So the reactions have been actually really positive.
But at that poor level, like, they're so willing to experiment like that? I mean, that's quite amazing. You must be inspiring them and educating them really well. So you talked about like the tobacco, that reform from the Indian government that placed a restriction on tobacco production. What other help do you think you could get from the Indian government that would really push this project?
But we think, we've decided that, well, we've always thought this actually, that the Indian government, there's not really that much they can do to directly help the project. I mean, like, give money, it's kind of tricky since, you know, we're an NPO and everything like that. But what we really want the Indian government to encourage is what they've been doing. 2 years ago, I think, there was an article published in The Hindu that said the Indian government is advocating farmers to go Jatropha and they're like saying, oh, we're going to give you 2 extra acres of land if you do. And that was 2 years ago. We haven't really heard since. So the status of how this is going is kind of out in the open. Mm-hmm. So if the Indian government is doing so, we think that they should keep doing so and really emphasize working with the farmers, since, I mean, the majority of India is subsistence level farming. We really want them to encourage grassroots kind of levels, bottom-up movements, not so much pull them up from the bootstrings kind of approaches. But if they're not doing so and the endeavor kind of failed, we still want the Indian government to keep trying to do so and not just neglect the farmers, because they really should try to help them. We're talking the majority of the country here. You gotta start somewhere, and it's a really good thing to help out the majority of people who are, you know, living in pretty abysmal conditions.
I agree completely. Now, but that also brings, now that you mentioned the government, that brings about an even bigger question, actually. You and I, Adarsha, actually talked about this one time at the meet and greet, but it was off screen. But now I'd like to actually bring this out into the open. You know, I'm sure you know your history, and you know that India is the biggest democracy in this world, in this modern day world. But with any democracy, there are problems. Recently, the biggest internal security threat has been the attacks on Indian security forces and regular citizens within rural regions by communist rebels who claim that they are the ones who are representing the people. Has this threat, considering that the Maoist rebels are within 228 at least districts of the 600 and many rural areas, does this affect your Jatropha project in any way whatsoever, considering the major threat that these Maoist rebels have?
I mean, we've definitely, when we go to India, we hear of, actually the last time Apurva and I went, there was several kind of uprisings. There was a big Hindu-Muslim kind of fight in the area that was actually really, really close to, which was unnerving. And we've heard definitely reports of the Maoist rebels causing sort of local commotions. And for the most part, which is really lucky for us, they've been kind of, you know, low-key, nothing so much as outright, no huge amounts of violence, which is good. At the same time, in the villages, the good thing about working in the villages seems to be that in the villages, at least that we work with, they're definitely, the good thing is that we don't know if there's Maoist rebels there, but it's very unlikely because my family actually has a really good connection to Parivartha in the villages. So it seems that whatever kind of influence that the Maoists would have seems to be restricted to outside these villages, and whatever the villagers Parivartha kind of helps out, because from what I've seen, actually, there's been very little to none there. But there have been, in the area in general of Karnataka, there have been things like that. And it's a little disconcerting, but at the moment, we are really happy to say that there's been no such problem.
Let's hope it stays that way, too.